Welcome to Elephant in the Room, a podcast featuring real conversations with real therapists on the elephant in every room, trauma. With this show, we are aiming to share insights from professional practitioners on trauma, its impacts, as well as various modalities and resources on healing for survivors. This podcast is produced by the Breaking Free Foundation, a Canadian registered charity that supports trauma survivors in reclaiming their lives and finding healing. All of the therapists interviewed on this podcast are members of the Breaking Free Foundation Trauma Practitioner Network. My name is Amber Craig. I am a trauma survivor, one of the co-founders of the Breaking Free Foundation, and the proud host of this podcast. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Kathleen Haase. Kathleen is a Reiki master, Harmonic Egg practitioner, and the owner of Harmonic Wellness Centre in Calgary. Please welcome to the podcast, Kathleen. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Amber.
So just to kick off with a very super easy question, I would love for you to just tell our listeners a bit more about your professional background and the areas that you work in.
Yeah. So I started off my professional career as a social worker. So I started off with a diploma at Mount Royal College, and then I moved on to the U of C and got my degree. And then that work I was a social worker for about 10 years. And I ranged in working from being in group homes and working in youth shelters and working more with the teen aspect. And then I moved on to work in foster care as a foster care support worker. And then from there, I moved on to work for Child and Family Services as a caseworker for a little while. And I'm a very sensitive person, and I got burnt out pretty quickly in that role. And so I took some time off. It was also around the time that I had met my husband and his kids. And so I really wanted to focus on building our family together. And so I started to work at his automotive repair shop for a couple of years while I just figured out what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to go back to social work or whether I wanted to change into doing something else. And that's actually when I found Montessori preschool. So I totally switched gears and I became a Montessori preschool teacher for 8 years. And then while I was teaching preschool, I actually had a preschool in our basement for the last 4 years of my teaching. And I was able to, that's when I found Reiki and I started doing energy healing on the side. So I was doing both of those kinds of things, which really kind of led me to the path that I'm on now. And yeah, so then I just kind of jumped into doing energy healing and working with different kind of healing modalities full time.
I'm really glad that I didn't get your answers ahead of time because you have a very fascinating background that I wasn't aware of. So I think it's really interesting that all of your past experiences would really lead you to where you are today, because I think they would serve you in lots of different avenues. I want to talk about Harmonic Egg. So I've heard about this obviously through you being part of our practitioner network, also from Theo and some other people who have had the experience. Yeah. There's probably a lot of listeners who don't know what this is. So can you please explain what the Harmonic Egg is?
Absolutely. So the Harmonic Egg it's a chamber that uses light, sound, and frequency to bring people back into a state of balance. Really, that's kind of, we're looking to bring balance into the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual bodies. And so the chamber itself is fairly large. We had to build a 14 by 14 room to accommodate the size of it. And there's a zero gravity chair inside. And so, yeah, so it runs at a 1600 hertz frequency. And so humans run between 10 and 20 hertz. So once we're in the Harmonic Egg, we're really raising our vibrational energy to let go of the stuff that is of lower vibrational energies. So those kind of things can be anything from trapped emotions that we've experienced, right? A lot of shame and guilt, those function at a really, really low frequency, and those are really easily trapped in our bodies. It can be a physical manifestation of like some sort of dis-ease in the body. It can be leftover things from even like breaks and falls and stuff like that, or concussions or things like that. Just anything that's going to take us out of that state of balance. The harmonic egg is actually able to pick up on, push it up to the surface, and help us to be able to let it go.
So I want to sort of take the listeners on an imaginary tour experience.
Yeah.
So if
Yep.
somebody is coming in for their first session with Harmonic Egg, what does that look like?
Yeah. So typically I meet with people for about half an hour prior to their session. There's an intake package that everybody needs to fill out before. And so I go over that with them to see if there's any kind of specific themes or things that might be going on for them that I might be able to assist with and just kind of giving some guidance around. And then we just sit and we talk about what the person is really wanting to achieve with the harmonic egg. One of the biggest things that we're doing with the egg is we're working with the client's intention. And so if people are coming in and they're wanting to work on physical healing, let's say they broke their ankle and they want to speed up their recovery, that's what we focus on. If people are wanting to come in to work on trauma and they're wanting to focus on being able to let go of some of those trapped emotions or the dis-ease that can go along with trying to process trauma in the like through the physical body, then that's what we focus on. If they're wanting to expand their spiritual journey and connect with their guides and stuff like that, that's what we focus on. And so through my conversations with them and after going through their intake package, we really are able to kind of figure out what that kind of looks like. There's some informal counseling that I do with people prior to their session. I was a social worker, but I'm not a registered social worker currently. And so there's a lot of kind of red tape, I guess, around that. So
Yeah.
so it's informal counseling. And yeah, so then we just really narrow down what the person wants to work on. That helps me as a practitioner to be able to figure out the song choices, the light choices, and that aspect of things for me is really, really amazing because when we're working with the harmonic egg, we're also working with instrumental choice. So one of the things, so in Chinese medicine, they talk about how each one of our internal organs is the house of an emotion, right? So kidney a lot of times is associated with fear, liver is associated with anger. And so, and there's grief around the lung area, right? And so we're using these concepts with the harmonic egg, but we're also using instrumental choice. And so each instrument has a resonation with an internal organ, with a note or a tone. And so, for instance, we do what's called an autonomic nervous system reset for everybody's first session. And what we're doing is we're really trying to get the body to reset itself, to get itself to a place where it can start to heal itself, right? Once our nervous system comes into a state of balance, the body can start to heal itself. And so we're putting people in that optimal place for them to be able to do that. So when we're working on the nervous system, we actually use a lot of harp or piano. So it's just so fascinating to me that we're able to use all of these things that we are constantly being exposed to on an everyday basis to be able to really tie everything together to help people. So anyways, that's kind of what I do as a practitioner to be able to figure out, okay, this person, maybe they've gone through some trauma, they've got some trapped fears in their body. I want to focus on supporting the kidney. If they've got some anger that they're wanting to work through because of what they are experiencing, we're going to bring in the flute and we're going to work on that anger piece. But we're also going to be using the harp and the piano to be able to bring the autonomic nervous system into that state of balance. So that's from my perspective what I'm doing. Then what happens is we actually get the person to get into the egg. So like I said, there's a zero gravity chair in there. So we tilt you back to your comfortability. We get you nice and comfy. And then Everybody gets a blanket, right? There's whenever we go into deep states of relaxation, our body temperatures drop. So we want people to be nice and comfy in there. There's a lot of people that ask questions about like, oh, I'm claustrophobic, or I'm really worried about getting into small spaces. Like, what's that all going to kind of be about? And to just kind of give the listeners an idea, there's the same amount of room inside the Harmonic Egg that there would be inside the cab of your vehicle or inside of a two-man bathroom. So it can actually fit a three-person couch inside, but it's just you in the chair. Um, and then if people are claustrophobic, what I do is before I start their session, I'll get them to sit in there, I'll get them nice and comfy, and then I close the door and I say to them, this is what the door feels like closed, and then I open the door back up. And if the clients are still feeling claustrophobic and they're not wanting the door to be shut, then we just don't shut the door, right? We want people to be comfortable and we want them to feel safe when they're in there. And yeah, especially given a lot of people's trauma histories and, just fears and not wanting to be in small spaces. And there's also a doorbell inside as well, so that there's a little pocket in there and there's a doorbell so that if anybody needs me during their session, they can just ring the doorbell and I'm right there outside the door to get them to see whatever they need. Um, their session is going to be 50 minutes. So it's 40 minutes of music followed by 10 minutes of silence. And once their session is over, after the 10 minutes of silence, I come in and I ring a bell to let them know that their session's over. I open up the door, I help them out of their chair, and then we sit down and we chat for a couple of minutes about what their experience was like.
Wow.
Yeah,
I know this is probably a difficult question to answer because it would vary by person, but
of course.
on average, how many sessions would you say that people are usually coming in for?
So typically for the starting off point, we recommend people come in for 3 sessions over a 6-week period. This really gives them and myself an idea of how the harmonic egg is going to be able to help them. So it's not really a one and done kind of thing. Just like if you were going to the chiropractor, if you had, let's say, a neck injury or a back injury, the chiropractor is going to give you an adjustment and it's going to feel better after your first session with them. But if you go back for multiple sessions, they're going to be able to help you, just like if you go back for multiple sessions with any other kind of healing modality, I think. And so yeah, 3 sessions for me is kind of like the jumping off point. After the 3 sessions, we sit down, we reevaluate what's going on. Have they achieved what they wanted to achieve with the harmonic egg? Or are more sessions necessary? Do we need to adjust? Do we want them to be coming in more? Do we want them to be coming in less? Like the frequency of what might be best for people. And we just it's done on a case-to-case basis for sure. Yeah.
Got it. And who would you say could benefit from this type of therapy?
Everyone. Yeah. So the harmonic egg is a really safe technology, right? So we're able to assist women who are pregnant. We're able to have little kids that have come in. Like I've had a little 2-year-old who's been recovering from cancer
Wow.
that's come in a couple of times. I've had a couple of my Montessori kids come in and try it out and really enjoyed it. It's wonderful for teenagers, right? To be able to just
Mm.
go in and kind of hit that reset button when they're going through all of their crazy hormone changes and figuring life out. I've had people who are experiencing palliative care. So we actually we're able to facilitate distance sessions as well for people. And so
Mm.
what we would do is we actually take a photo of the person, the name of their birth on their birth certificate and their birth date, and we put that into the egg if they're not physically able to be there. I would still call them on the phone and I would talk to them or to whoever their caregiver was, and we would still set intention. We would still look at what they were wanting to accomplish. But yeah, a lot of times it can even ease that transition as we're going from this journey on to the next leg. Um, so really and truly, it's literally from like birth to death and everything in between.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who should avoid this type of therapy for any reason?
No, I don't think so. Again, like I said, everybody can definitely benefit from it for sure. Um, Typically what we recommend for people as well when they're looking at doing different types of healing modalities is just kind of working with your practitioner to make sure that they're spacing things out a little bit, right? Um, just Gail Lynn is the inventor of the harmonic egg, and she always talks about how you wouldn't eat all of your meals in one day at the same time. Like you wouldn't eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner all in one sitting. You'd eat and you'd let things digest, right? And so when you're doing other healing modalities, so if you're going to the chiropractor, we want you to wait 24 to 48 hours after the chiropractor before getting into the egg to really just let the body settle into what's taken place. And then after your harmonic egg session, we recommend that people that they take about like 5 to 7 days to be able to integrate their egg session for a couple of different reasons, right? If you're doing too many things too close together, you're not going to know what's working. So if people are coming to us and they've got anxiety and they go into the egg and then the next day, let's say they go to acupuncture and then their anxiety lessens. Well, was it the egg or was it acupuncture that helped, right? So there's that piece. People also will go through a detox process after their experience. Again, right, we're raising the vibrational energies of our body. And so when we're sitting in that 1600 hertz frequency, things like heavy metals, toxins, viral loads, plastics, things that we just come into our bodies from being a human and being in our environments and everything that we're exposed to, those function at a really low vibrational energy. And so we're going to be detoxing from some of that stuff too. So we just want people to be mindful that in the week following their session, that if you're doing too many things, that you can actually put yourself into what's referred to as a healing crisis, right? That's when the body detoxes too much too quickly. That can look like vomiting, diarrhea, headaches, and migraines. We don't want that for anybody, right? We want this to be as gentle on people as possible. And so I think more than anything, just kind of being mindful of when you're doing the different modalities that you're spreading them out and that things are integrating as nicely as they can. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So given that you took a few different pathways to get where you are today, how did you initially find out about the harmonic egg and what drove you to get into this type of work?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Okay, so I started into this line of work because I was having some physical issues. I was having some pretty intense heartburn, and I was being sent for all of these different tests through Western medicine, and everything came back normal. And my doctor was like, "That's it." But I was like, "But I'm still in pain. Like, what do you mean that's it?" And so I actually started down my own personal healing journey of going to different modalities like chiropractic and acupuncture, massage, Reiki, right? Like just doing all of the kind of quote unquote alternative healing practices other than Western medicine. And so during that time when I was seeing my Reiki practitioner, she was like, "So, like, when are you going to take a Reiki class?" And, so I ended up taking my first Reiki practitioner's class through her. And that really kicked off my, my spiritual journey of, where I've kind of gotten myself to today. And so during that point, I really started diving into different modalities and just taking different classes. I took an angelic healing practitioner's class, and I took some shaman classes, and I was benefiting so much from doing different types of healing modalities, more so than any pill that any doctor had given me or any test had been able to tell me of what was going on with me. And so one of the things that I was doing during that time is I was spending a lot of time watching Gaia, which for those people who don't know what Gaia is, it's a streaming service that's like Netflix, but it's more for like the esoteric, alternative and spiritually minded people. And there's a lady on there who's named Regina Meredith, and she was actually interviewing Gail Lynn, who's the inventor of the harmonic egg. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to Gail, and I just was like, just completely drawn to what she was talking about. And it was so amazing because it just, so many things of what she was talking about resonated with me. I've always had a really deep connection with sound and with music. And so I Googled the harmonic egg, and there wasn't anything that had been opened in Western Canada at that point in time. But the lady who opened the first egg in Alberta was in Cochrane. And so she had her calendar already up like 6 months prior to her even opening. And so I signed up. I think I was probably one of her first people that had signed up or whatever that far ahead of time. And I feel like it was, you know, like early spring, and she wasn't open until August. And so I went to the harmonic egg, and the reasons why I was going was because I was wanting to evolve my spiritual self, right? I had been raised Catholic and am not a practicing Catholic, but that formed a lot of the ways that I viewed the world. And I found that intuitively what I was experiencing about that was very different from what I had been taught through Catholicism. And so I was on my own path of trying to figure out, what does this mean to me, rather than what was I being told and taught from external sources. And so I went into the egg with the intention of really just kind of, you know, connecting with my intuition and expanding my psychic abilities. And by this time, I had actually figured out that I was clairaudient, which, for those people who aren't really kind of familiar with that term, I have the ability to hear psychically. I guess that's the most basic way that you can say it. And so that was really, really fascinating to me. So I was wanting to connect with my guides and with the angels and just really dive deeper into how that aspect of myself could assist in my healing journey, and how that could evolve to assist others with, as a practitioner, with their healing journey. And so I was going every other week. So I actually live in a town just outside of Calgary to the east. And so I was driving out to Cochrane, which is about an hour drive one way. And I was going every other week, and I was just experiencing like these massive leaps and bounds and expansions. And physically, I was feeling better. I was less anxious. I was more at peace. I was just really loving every minute of what I was experiencing. And it was during a meditation that it came to me that I was supposed to go into doing healing full time, which was a really difficult concept for me, because at the time I was a Montessori preschool teacher, and I had this school in my basement, and I thought I was going to be doing this for the rest of my life, and that, you know, I just really loved working with the kids. But the universe has a different plan. So, well, I was sitting in the harmonic egg during one of my sessions, and it was like this light bulb went off, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is how I want to bring more healing to other people. And if it can do this much in a short period of time for me, imagine what this could do for the rest of the planet. And I was so excited, and it was just like, okay, this is it. So I went home and I sat down with my husband, and I was like, I'm going to buy an egg. And he was like, yeah, I kind of figured that, you know, he's a pretty intuitive guy himself, but he was like, yeah, I kind of figured that's the way that this was going. And then, you know, I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I'm going to buy an egg. And, you know, she's a really spiritual person too. And she was like, yeah, well, I kind of figured that's the direction that this life was going for you, you know? So, the two people closest to me had already figured that out before I really had.
Right.
And yeah, anyways, and then so I was put into contact with Paige, who is the Harmonic Egg contact for Canada. And my process began there. And so then I had to go through the process of talking to the parents of the kids at my school, which was like,
Right.
oh, still like I get really choked up whenever I think about it. But um, yeah, so, and then I had to sell my business and find a space for the egg and um, where I wanted to be and where the egg wanted to be, right? The egg also brings healing into the land as well. And so, there's no coincidences of where they're placed because those are the areas that really, really need it. So, yeah.
That's
And that's where
very,
it all went, Amber. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very interesting pathway to get there. And I know that you describe the egg as being like a form of energy healing, but your center also provides energy healing services, and I know that can mean different
Ah,
things for different people. So what does it look like for you in your practice?
okay. So I do a lot of intuitive energy healing. And so I do some Reiki, but that's not really that's where the basis of everything started for me, but that's definitely not where it's evolved to. Um, so I do some channeling work as well with the angels that I work with. And so a lot of times I'll channel a message for a client prior to them arriving. And then we sit down and we chat a little bit about what's going on with them in their lives, very similar to what I do with the egg. And then we go over that channeled message together. And I'm really working in people's chakras. And so I'm working with my guides and my angels, and they have a very specific way of communicating what's going on for the client in front of me at the time. And so a lot of times I'm shown pictures in people's chakras or little tiny movies or things like that, or there'll be symbols that'll show up, right? So um, an example for that would be if I'm working on balancing people's chakras and let's say something has happened to them in a previous lifetime that's referred to as like a previous lifetime block. Um, let's say I'm working in their sacral chakra, an actual block, like a square that's black, will show up. And
Mm,
so I take the block out of the chakra and I say, what's the past life block? And then I write down whatever it is that I hear, and then I share that with them afterwards. So it's just those kind of things, right? That it's very specific to me and my intuition, and my guides know how to communicate with me. Um, I do entity removals for people, right? I know that can be kind of a scary thing for a lot of people, but you know, there's a lot of times when we're not really necessarily feeling like ourselves, or right, that there's just something completely off in our energetic fields. And a lot of times that can be low vibrational energies that attach. So that's part of my work. I'm also able to do what's referred to as soul retrieval. And so soul retrieval is something that typically occurs for people when, so sorry, we lose part of our souls when we go through trauma. And so what happens is, as part of our soul actually breaks off and is frozen in time, and it just kind of goes somewhere else to stay until somebody who has the ability to do soul retrieval is able to go find that piece of the person's soul and help bring it back to them and help them integrate that. But there's typically a lot of healing work that needs to happen prior to that. And so when I was doing that kind of training specifically, I had asked one of the angels that I work with around that, like, why does this happen? What, like, to me, it was just such a bizarre concept that we lose a part of our soul. And the response that I got back was, if it didn't happen, it's so overwhelming and it's so much for people to handle that if it didn't happen, people would leave this planet at an alarming rate. And that's the way it was phrased. And so for me, I just kind of associate that with people choosing to leave the planet by, committing suicide, or, um, ending their lives earlier than what their soul wanted to. And so, yeah, so it's super fascinating to be able to find, be working on a 34-year-old person and go and find their 12-year-old soul fragment frozen in time somewhere and bring it back to them and reintegrate it. So that's part of the work as well. I do practice a little bit of mediumship. And so quite typically what happens is sometimes a loved one that's crossed over will show up during a session, and it's not typical mediumship. Like, if you go and you see a medium and you're wanting, to ask your loved ones questions and stuff like that, it's from this point so far, I guess, the loved ones typically show up with a message or with something that's direct to the person's healing at that point in time. For instance, I had a client whose brother had committed suicide, and he was the first one that he just showed up in session one day, and I was like, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
And so he had a very specific message for his sister, and so after I gave that to her after I'd finished doing the energy healing, right, we were kind of able to process that, and it really helped get her into a better place for where she was with his passing. And so, um, and then, yeah, like I also do Reiki and just really, it's the people that are really doing the healing though, Amber, like a lot of people say like, oh, you're the healer. And for me, I'm somebody that holds space for people to do their healing, right? Like I might be moving energy around, but I'm not the one consciously stepping into wanting to change the energies and move things around, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I like how you said that. I think one of the cool things about our programming with our grants is that people have access to so many different types of trauma therapy and trauma healing.
Yeah.
It's not traditional therapy anymore. So I love this conversation because it will open people up to something new potentially. But at the same token, I know that newness can be scary for people. So for anyone
Absolutely.
listening who's like skeptical about energy healing or the harmonic egg,
Yeah.
what would you say to those people?
Well, I was definitely one of those people, right? Like if if you would have talked to me 10 years ago, I would have told you that you were batshit crazy and there was
Right.
no way that I was ever going to do something like that. For me, it got to a point where it was like the things that I was told that work weren't working. And
Mhm.
so I needed to find what worked for me. And so for me, that's what I want for everyone, right? The harmonic egg's not going to be for every single person. Doing energy work with me isn't going to be for every single person, but it's a matter of trying different types of things out to find out what is for you, because we're going through a lot of changes here in the planet, right? There's a lot of things that are going on and a lot of healing that needs to be done for things to be able to change for all of us, right? And so, for the skeptics, I would just say, um, you're not going to know until you try. And so if you feel like you've tried everything and you haven't tried the egg, or you haven't tried Reiki, or you haven't gone to the acupuncturist, or you haven't, like, whatever it is, try something different for yourself, because it's so worth it and it's so amazing once you do find that thing that you really click with or that really resonates with you. Um, and for the people who are skeptical, for the egg specifically, I always tell people, like, do you have something against relaxation? Because that's what you're going to do, right? Like you're going to go
Yeah.
sit in the egg and you're going to relax for 50 minutes and you're going to be
Yeah.
away from your phone. And, for moms, I'm always like, you're going to be 50 minutes of nobody needing you. Like, how amazing is that to just be able to go and give yourself 50 minutes of solitude? Um, and, like one of my sons, he's 17, he goes in there and he has like the best naps of his life, right? And so he
Yeah.
just goes in there and like I shut the door and he completely just conks out, but he still benefits. You don't need to be awake and be aware of what's
Mhm.
going on to benefit from bringing the body and the soul back into a state of balance, right?
That's
So
yeah, that's a really great way to position it because I think a lot of energy healing is like that, where you have a very relaxed
Yeah,
experience, regardless if that ends up being the thing for you, that's still going to be a benefit.
totally, totally. And I learned a lot I didn't know very much about the nervous system prior to my work in doing the harmonic egg. And, I'm somebody who suffered from depression and anxiety and trauma for decades. And I had no idea that it was like how shot my nervous system was. And yeah, I'm such an advocate for the egg specifically now because I didn't know what it was like to be in a body that wasn't in fight and flight, right? So
Right.
for the listeners right now who are like, well, what is your nervous system, right? Um, it's being in that state of fight, flight, freeze versus when we're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, like what we're doing with the harmonic egg, we're helping people into a state that's referred to as rest and digest, right? And so when we're in that fight, flight, freeze mode, our immune systems are lowered and our digestive systems quite often are affected because if we think back to when we were cavemen, right? Like this is the example that I give people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When we were cavemen and a tiger walked into the cave, we would go into that fight, flight, freeze mode. It's an automatic response to a threat or of being unsafe. And
Right.
so the immune system shuts down, the digestive system shuts down, and it gives energy over to the physical body so we could get ourselves to a place of safety. So we as a species could continue to live, right? But we're so
Mm.
inundated and surrounded by fear, right? Everywhere that you turn, there is fear around every single corner, every social media platform, every newscast, right? Like there's fear everywhere we go, on top of the fact that we have our own traumas and our own fears from our own things from this lifetime or from previous lifetimes. And so people are stuck in that state of fight, flight, freeze, and they don't know it. Like I had no idea that I was stuck in that state for almost 20 years until I started
Right.
doing something to get myself out of that. And I was like, oh, like this is what relaxed can feel like. I thought I was relaxed when I went for a massage before, but my experience in the egg took me to a completely different level of being able to achieve that. And
Right.
so, yeah, for me, right, like I just really am so passionate about wanting people to just better, to know that there are things out there that can help them get to that state and that there is something out there that can assist them. It's just, again, I'm not, if it's the egg, great. If it's going to Reiki,
Right.
fantastic. If it's your acupuncturist, if it's whatever it is, just find something. Yeah.
That's excellent. I think you've probably reached several people with your message today. I always ask this question of everyone on the podcast because we have
Ah,
sort of like a running library, but do you have any favorite resources on trauma that you like to recommend?
absolutely. So my favorite book um, is The Body Keeps the Score um, by Bessel van der Kolk. Um, a lot of the work that I do with people looks at the mental or the emotional root cause of what's going on for us physically, right? Like if there's something off in the mental, emotional, or spiritual bodies, it shows up in the physical. And this book was absolutely fascinating. I also I've got a background in psychology. I started off in psychology before I went into social work, and so I was really able to understand on a greater scale of what trauma does to our brain and our behavior and all of that. Um, so that would be my first one. My other one, that the other book that I really love working out of, and this isn't necessarily for people for trauma, but it is really great for figuring out what the physical body is trying to tell us. Um, Your Body is Telling You to Love Yourself by Lise Bourbeau. It's a super fascinating book where, you know, if you're like, I've had shoulder pain for 10 years, but I never had an injury and I don't know why I have a tight shoulder, you can go in there and it'll give a couple different reasons as to what might be going on for you. Um, Very similar work to Louise Hay. She was kind of like a pioneer in that area. So her book, You Can Heal Your Life, is another one that really assisted me along my healing journey. Um, and just helping people to kind of evaluate and look at what's going on, what your body again might be telling you based off of what you think and your experiences or your programming. And then my other favorite book, and again, this isn't necessarily specific to trauma as much as it is for just people who are sensitive, right? For people who identify as being empaths. Sensitive is the New Strong by Anita Moorjani is such an amazing book. She's such a phenomenal lady. If you don't know her story, she actually had stage 4 cancer and died in the hospital. Like she was, the doctors said, yep, she's gone. She had an out-of-body experience with and connected with her father on the other side, and she came back to her body and she healed her body from cancer on her own, from stage 4, like from death. And she's come back to give messages to people about how you can heal yourself and how, yeah, like I said, we're our best healers, right? So I think whether it's from trauma or, you know, the trauma spectrum is just so big that I think it just reaches so many different things that it's definitely applicable for a lot of people who is, I'm an empath, and so I feel things very, very deeply. And so some things that other people might not necessarily feel is traumatic to them might be for me because I just feel things a little bit deeper. So, you know, for people who are kind of struggling or grappling with that kind of idea of like, why do I feel things so deeply? That's a really good place to start for them as well.
That's great. We'll definitely have links to those resources in the show notes.
Awesome.
Really appreciate your time to discuss this today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we close?
Let's see. I guess one thing that I do want to share is about specific for people who have gone through trauma and are looking to use the harmonic egg. The harmonic egg for me is a really wonderful place for people who have experienced trauma because you don't need to tell your story to me, right? I don't need to know the ins and outs of, you know, I think on another interview that I did, one of the guys had said, you know, a common thing amongst therapists is like, you need to feel it to heal it. And for me, like I said, I don't need to know. I don't need you to retell your story, right? I have heard from a lot of clients as well. Like I've told this story to so many different therapists and I'm just like, I'm sick of saying it over and over and over again. I don't need to know the details. If you want to share the details with me, I'm more than happy to hold space for that to take place because if that's what's going to assist you on your healing journey for sure. But to be able to just say, I want to work on my post-traumatic stress and know that there's songs and there's light choices for that, and that you don't have to tell your story over again to be able to go into the harmonic egg and deal with some of those things, or, you know, to allow them to come to the surface or whatever it is. I can't tell people like how fascinating it is for me to be in the job that I'm in because I see miracles happen with the harmonic egg every day. I had a client specifically who, he's a friend of mine, and he had experienced sexual abuse at a young age. And he was a skeptic for sure coming to the egg.
Yeah.
But, you know, he had done EMDR with a therapist previously, and so was open to just trying different things. And during his session, he was able to connect, one of the struggles that he had really had, and he's given me permission to share this, by the way. One of the struggles that he had growing up was that he didn't really know who he was because he experienced this trauma at such a young age. And so he said he felt like he had a bit of an imposter syndrome, right? Who am I without this trauma? I don't know who that is. And while he was in the Harmonic Egg, he had what I referred to as like a third eye experience, right? And so it's kind of like when a movie is playing in your mind, or like a dream state, but you're conscious and you're aware of what's taking place.
Right.
And he was able to go back to an age when he was 3 years old, before the abuse had taken place, and reconnect with his inner child. And he was able to, smell things and experience things and feel things in that connection with that 3-year-old, as the 3-year-old was experiencing it. And something completely just shifted for him while he was in that session. And when he came out of that session, he just said, I no longer have that imposter syndrome. Like, I was able to connect with that piece of myself, and I know who I am.
Right.
And so to be able to have a modality for people to be able to do that kind of thing, it is priceless, right? Like, how do you put, just so phenomenal. And that's one example of, the 300 clients that I've seen over the past year. So you just never know what's going to come up during a session and how that's going to help people, for sure. I think that's pretty much what I have to say about most of that, Amber.
I think that's a really beautiful note to end on. I hope that this conversation has given people listening something else to consider in their healing path. So I do appreciate you taking time to share a little bit about what you do today. Thank you so much for being on the show. And if anyone is looking for more information about Kathleen and her practice, please see our show notes.
Beautiful. Thank you for having me. It was good to see you again.
Yes, thank you. The Breaking Free Foundation offers therapy grants for trauma survivors in Alberta, and we also host 2 free support meetings a month. One is in person in Calgary, and one is online. For more information on trauma therapy and our organization, please visit us online at breakingfreefoundation.ca. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share. That's all for now. Stay well.